is episode 47 of the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt. My job here is to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. On this episode, we have an interview with Mr. David Moody. He's the owner of Moody Construction. They're a general contractor in Georgia. He's been in business for over 25 years. He's an entrepreneur who started his business over 25 years ago, and it's still going strong. He's got a lot of great advice, and we cover some topics, including the following: his background, which may surprise some of you as he's got a surprising background that you may not expect for a guy who started a construction business. Also talked about how he started the construction business, the origin story of Moody Construction. We also spent some time talking about a tragic event that happened in his childhood that he had to overcome as an adult, and as a result, he has started a blog to help other folks who went through the same thing. Very interesting. And as well as how David's faith affects his business and leadership. So, without further ado, here is my interview with David Moody of Moody Construction. Enjoy. All right, David Moody, thanks for being on the podcast. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Todd, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, tell us a little bit about your business and where you're located and what you do.
Well, I started a company 28 years ago called Moody Construction Company, and we're a full-service general contractor and construction manager at risk company here in the Southeast, and we're based out of Lithonia, Georgia.
Okay. And can you give us some idea of the scale of your business, either number of employees or annual revenue, something like that?
Sure. We average about 75 to 85 million a year. We have 45 employees. We're working on the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We just completed the Atlanta History Center addition and renovation. In fact, we just won a Build Georgia award for that project. We got that notification Friday. We're building a new cyclorama, and we've done a number of buildings at Morehouse College, the Ray Charles Performing Arts Center, the Leadership Center, and I guess, as they say, the list kind of goes on.
Well, congratulations on the Build Georgia award. I know that's a real feather in your cap.
Oh, yes.
So let's talk about, you've been in business for 28 years, you've been around the block. I would assume you've had some ups and downs. When you hear the word success, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's interesting because I'm going to be 60 in May, and success in my 20s is different than success in my 30s. Success in my 40s and 50s is different than about to turn 60. So I think we have to be careful when we talk about success, because success is it changes with time. Success for me now is just being able to, one, be healthy, have a family that loves me, I love them. We're enjoying life, we're enjoying the business, and preparing the business for the next generation of construction leaders. So that's where success is for me now.
So you said something that may strike people a little funny. You said enjoy the business. I would say there are people out there who don't enjoy their business. They're small business owners, and I know I was there at one point when I had my own business. There was a time I wish it all would just go away, and it was a long way from enjoying it. So do you have anything you would say to those folks who are in that situation to encourage them?
Well, sure. First of all, I really think it's important that people understand being an entrepreneur is 24/7. Even though you might take vacations, you might get away from the business, but you never stop thinking about it, how to get better, mistakes you made, how to improve, lessons learned. But more importantly, for me, I realized that people basically ran their lives off the decisions I made as an entrepreneur. What I mean by that, the people who work with you, that paycheck and the future of the company, it helps them determine if they can send a child to school, if they'll have food on their table. I mean, it's a lot of weight that comes with being an entrepreneur. And also, when you're in the business like construction, you eat what you kill. and you got to kill something all the time to keep eating. So it's a very stressful being an entrepreneur. So when I say enjoy it, it does have to be something that you really have a passion for, but you also have to have a passion for people because you people are dependent on every decision you make.
So what helps you get through those tough times when cash flow is tight or you're not able to get the projects or things just look bleak? What's your process for getting through that?
Well, it's a number of things. One is exercise, a whole lot of praying and my faith, trying to figure out how do we improve, how do we get better. But I think the other thing that really helps me, every job has stress. So regardless, even if I was to close tomorrow, whatever I was going to do, as far as maybe even working for someone else, I still would have stress. So what kind of helped me get through it was life's going to have a certain amount of stress. And at least as an entrepreneur, I kind of control, and I hate to use the word control because we don't control anything, but at least I can kind of have some say so in the direction we're heading and hope that things work out the way they work. So it's just a matter of picking yourself up. I'm fortunate to have a great wife I've been married with for 33 years who's been very supportive in the business. And when you have a spouse who's very supportive, it makes it a lot easier for the tough times because you're not worried about, well, what's my spouse going to think because things are getting a little tight. So a lot of pieces have to fall in place for the tough times to really work for you because there's more than just having the work in place. It's support from family, your spouse, banks, all kind of pieces have to kind of fall in place.
Yeah. I want to touch a little bit on how your faith affects your business, but two questions about being an entrepreneur. One is a quick one, and maybe one not so quick. The quick one would be, can everybody be an entrepreneur, in your opinion?
I think everybody is capable to be one as far as their right to be one, but it takes a lot of personal sacrifice and emotional sacrifice and the willingness to really kind of suffer through some really tough times as an entrepreneur. And not everybody's cut out for that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there are some people in life, they rather know where the paycheck's coming from versus having to make the paycheck. And there are some people who really don't want to be responsible for that many people. So if you can be so people who don't want to be responsible for others, they need to be entrepreneurs where they don't have to have a business where they need basically other people working for them. Because it is definitely stressful and wears on you emotionally when you know people are counting on you besides your family. Your employees and their families are counting on you.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of weight. What are some misconceptions that people have about being an entrepreneur, and maybe some of the misconceptions that you had going into it?
Well, I'm one of those folks who went into it the funny kind of backwards way, which was I was started off as an architect for Bechtel Power Corporation. I have a degree in psychology and a professional degree in architecture. And I actually thought I was going to be an architect. And I worked for Bechtel in the nuclear power division. And I was fortunate enough to take a field assignment on a nuclear power plant. And I fell in love with construction. And this is 1981. So this is before the internet, cell phones, and we actually had to draw as architects. We didn't use computers. And I actually went on that job site, and a couple of things really hit me. One, I realized I was only going to be an average architect, but I realized I could take my knowledge of architecture and really be a great person in construction, and it fit my personality. And I think that's very important in business too, is to know what you can really be good at doing versus what you want to do. So I think those are the couple important things that you have to do. But anyway, I left Bechtel. My wife and I got married, and we moved down to um, Atlanta and started working for a small company. And 2 months after leaving Bechtel, and we both left great jobs, that company went bankrupt. And that was the
Mm.
longest drive home ever in my life because I had to go tell my wife that maybe I didn't make the right decision. But I
Wow.
often tell people that story because what was actually my worst day was actually my best day because I started working for smaller companies over the next 4 or 5 years, and we had struggled and things were tight. And finally, we reached a point and said, well, we might as well go for it. So 5 years later, I was in business, never had ran anything. The highest I had ever had been was a project manager. So I was so naive about what it takes to run a business that I was learning everything every day about running a business. And I think that happens to most of us entrepreneurs. We don't know what we don't know till we get in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely my experience. It was, so as somebody put it, it was one of the most expensive educations I ever had. Definitely. So, talk a little bit about your how your faith affects your business. I mean, what does that look like in day-to-day decision making, dealing with people, how you deal with problems, et cetera? Anything that kind of comes to mind there?
Well, I think I have a interesting situation. One, you got to remember, and my faith is very, very important because 4 years into my business, I finally disclosed to my wife I had been sexually abused as a child, and I had never told anyone. And 2 months after that, I started having panic attacks, um, had a complete nervous breakdown, suffered from post traumatic stress syndrome. So I was falling apart at the same time I'm trying to build a business. My wife's a RN, registered nurse, and she would kind of put me together to go out and go to work, but I couldn't work very long. But this is how I know that there is a God for me, because as broken as I was, my business still made it through that, and I also recovered and healed from it. So that's a personal story for me, that why my faith is important, and why I try as often and every day to keep my faith in the center of everything I do, because it was my faith, and God carried me when I needed to be carried in 1992 when I was a broken man, from dealing from childhood sexual abuse. So to me, that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's kind of a that's it's a worst case situation. Starting a business and all that comes back up, and to go through that would be overwhelming. Definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that's a big part of your story, and so that's a good segue. Talk a little bit about your blog, moodyspeaks.com, and the the way that you're reaching out and helping other people who've been through similar experiences.
Well, last year, that's the beauty of building a business, aging, and getting to a point financially where you can do some things. My wife and I moved to Cambridge last year at Harvard, and I was in a program at Harvard. It's called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. It's for leaders who want to make a difference in the world. And from there, I took my blog and decided to turn it into a website, which has been read in over 115 countries. And my book is coming out in a couple of weeks on my journey of healing. But really, what I learned, one person can make a difference in the world. We all can make a difference. But more importantly, not only can we survive, but we can thrive. And one of the things I talk about in my book is what it was like to build a business while going on this journey of healing. And I kept what happened to me still private until 2013 when I spoke publicly for the first time. And since then, I decided I was going to live with this for the rest of my life anyway. I might as well do something as positive as possible to help anyone who has suffered through a horrible childhood trauma or suffer through panic attacks or nervous breakdown. Because, in business or in life, people don't like to admit those things happen because it's such a negative stereotype that goes with people who've had panic attacks or PTSD or a nervous breakdown. And I share my story because I want people to see not only can you recover and heal, but you can have an incredible life, great family, and not let that past rule you forever. But it takes, proper counseling and a lot of work to get there.
So, as business owners and leaders, vulnerability, especially in the construction industry, doesn't really come naturally, right? It's
Right.
not. It's not. I guess it's frowned upon to be really vulnerable, touchy-feely, share your emotions and feelings. It's all scope, schedule, budget, that sort of thing. So what would you say to people, what was your experience when you started being vulnerable like that? How did the people that you led or impacted respond to you being vulnerable?
At first I was really scared to say anything for the very reason you're talking about, but the response has been phenomenal, positive. But it also helped me improve as a leader because I realized there were certain triggers and certain things that I could overreact if I felt someone was trying to use me or take advantage of me or take advantage of my people, my business, or whatever. And I realized that a lot of my leadership flaws were results from my childhood trauma that I had not dealt with. And I think to be a really good leader, you have to be really honest about what makes you tick, what are your triggers, and listen and open your eyes to how you lead all the time, because we do evolve and grow as a leader. At least I have.
So what are some practical tips you would give somebody who's a leader and they want to get some feedback either from their employees, from the people they're leading, et cetera? What are some practical ways to get that feedback loop started?
Well, one of the things I did, I actually brought an outside person in to meet with key folks in the company and do a questionnaire, and some of it hurt, but it was really good to get that feedback about how I was coming across. Because a lot of times you don't realize you're coming across the way you are. But then again, when you're an entrepreneur and you're putting everything into it, you can be sensitive when people don't appreciate how hard it is to make payroll and they're kind of blowing things off or making what I would call preventable mistakes. So there's a real delicate balance we have to do in this process.
Yeah, that's a smart approach to get somebody else to come in, gather the feedback, and then I assume this outside person delivered the feedback to you and kind of went through it. So it wasn't like I've heard a lot of leaders say you should just sit down with your people and say, what am I doing wrong? And that's
not going to work.
Yeah, I doubt you're going to get a lot of really straight feedback from most people.
For me, I found you needed a third party to do a situation where it was completely confidential and get that information. But you got to be a special person to want to hear that. Not everybody's cut out to hear that.
Yeah, I guess if you're not interested in changing, then you probably shouldn't even get the feedback because it's just going to make you mad.
Right. That's exactly what will happen if you're not careful.
Yeah. Interesting. So we're talking about leadership. How would you describe your leadership approach and style?
Again, that's changed with times. Now as a 59-year-old, almost 60 in a couple of months, I'm probably more patient. One of the things I've really learned that we're getting away from, that I'm really getting back into, we don't talk to people enough verbally. We do so much by internet, email, and texting that so many situations and problems can be solved if once we knew there was an issue, we picked up the phone and went and met with somebody or talked to them on the phone. But we'll send emails back and forth, and they just kind of get worse. And that's one of the biggest challenges I'm finding in leadership, especially with the younger generation, is them being comfortable to have verbal conversations with people without it being mean-spirited. You know, get to the root of the problem and then come up with a solution.
So I want to get back to millennials because that's a topic that a lot of people ask about. How do you deal with millennials? But I want to dig into your leadership style. You know, some people, they say, well, you've got to rule with an iron fist, or you know, the employees are the problem, or there's the servant leadership approach where we're here to support people. Some companies have a employment for life, and you're never going to get fired. We're always going to try to make it work with you. Where would you say your style lands on that spectrum?
Well, over time, I'm definitely a servant leader, but also there have been times, because of my childhood past, I have carried people longer than I should have who really weren't best for the company, but I had this leadership that I could fix everything or fix everybody. And that was something I really had to grow out of. Not everybody is fit. Doesn't make you wrong, doesn't make them wrong. Just not everybody's a good fit. And I realized that's not leadership. So I really had to grow out of that. Also, I'm easygoing, but I could get really perturbed when somebody had a real lackadaisical attitude and didn't care when they cost the company money. Like, oh, so what? I made a mistake. So I could get pretty upset. So I pay attention to it, but I've learned, you know, you got to have the right people because you have to be mature to work for us. And what I mean by that, I don't want to have to chase you. You know what your job description is. You know what your duties are. We're going to give you what you need. One of the things I always ask people when I talk to them is, what can I do to help? I always offer, what can I do to help? And I've learned a lot of people are uncomfortable asking for help because then they think that means they either don't know the job or they're over their head. So as a good leader, you got to help people find out when they need help, but more importantly, be comfortable admitting they need help.
Yeah, I think it was a book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni is his name. And somebody asked him after reading the book, they said, Mr. Lencioni, what's one piece of advice you would tell everybody to do? And he said, weekly one-on-ones with your people and ask them two questions. What are you working on? And what do you need help with? What are you working on? What do you need help with? And that's what his entire book boiled down to. So I think that's good advice. You open the door for people to ask for help. But yeah, it just blows away all of those misconceptions about asking questions and being fearful for your job and being a fraud. So when the boss asks, "Hey, do you need help with anything?" I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, but it's amazing how many people are afraid to say, "I need help."
Yeah. And I would say if tell me if you agree with this statement, but if you're a leader and nobody's asking you for help, that's probably a bad sign. Would you agree?
Yeah. But then you got the other side where you got people who will constantly ask for help, and it's not that they really need help, it's just easier to ask for help and have somebody kind of do their work. So there's a real delicate balance as a leader, really paying attention to who are the, people. Because, unfortunately, when you run a company and you got many different types of folks, there are some folks who are trying to find, who are really committed, and there's some folks who are trying to find the easiest way.
So you mentioned that earlier in your career, you tended to carry people a little too long. So how do you know that it's time to cut somebody loose because they're not the right fit? Are there are there red flags? Are there symptoms that kind of trigger you to be concerned now?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do paying attention to one, just production, that person's production, their attitude, how they talk to people when you're not around. What kind of, when you get calls from clients or other subs or other folks saying, when I talked to person X, man, they were really short or mean spirited or just, I really don't want to talk to them if I don't have to. That's one warning sign.
Yeah.
Always late or missing deadlines, and then always having an excuse. And it never improves when you give them what they need. When they say, well, I need this, I need that, but nothing ever improves. Because the other thing I've learned, over life, there are some people who really like crisis operations. They love being in a crisis because they feel like it makes them feel like they're showing how much they're worth, and they just love being in a crisis. Well, my personality is we should minimize crisis and preventable stress. I believe I don't want to work like that, and I don't want my folks to work like that.
Yeah.
So you have to watch people who create what I call crisis because it just makes them feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, I call it the no problem problem.
Right.
They're the people that operate best in firefighter mode. They'll create problems because they're not comfortable if there's not a crisis around.
Right.
Yeah, it's really strange. So, all right, so you're a business owner. We got some folks listening to this podcast who are up and coming college graduates, engineers, estimators, project managers, just ready to set the world on fire. What advice would you give to those people to really add value to an organization like yourself? What are you as a business owner looking for in people who are in the first 5 years of their career, let's say?
First is dependability, great attitude, willingness to learn, willingness to dig in and not have to be told what to do when they run out of work. Always offering, what can I do to help? Just have that desire to show that they want to learn and be a person who just tells what's going on too. If they make a mistake, say they made a mistake. But I think really just having a good energy about them where people want to work with them and want to see them be successful.
I noticed you didn't say anything about technical ability or being able to create a Revit model or anything technical.
All that comes with time. I mean, as long as they know the
Right.
basics of how to read blueprints and know the terminology and everything else comes in time. I think one of the best things I've learned when I finished architecture school, I thought I knew everything until I took my first field assignment. And I realized how little I knew. And I'm a firm believer to really learn construction, you got to spend time in the field and really see how a building goes together. And that's where you really learn construction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having an approach that there's a lot of stuff you don't know that's a good way to go in. That's even 20 years into it, I still try to go in. My approach is that there's something out there that I don't know, and there's something that's going to kick my butt on this project if I'm not careful, and I need to ask a lot of questions to figure out what it is. Now, that's great advice. What are some of the common mistakes you see construction professionals make when it comes to leading people?
I think one of the biggest mistakes, one, is being patient yourself as a leader and listening, but also making decisions timely with good information and not letting something just drag on and not make a decision. I think I see that happen a lot, but also overextending yourself before your company is ready to handle something of a certain size and you don't really have the people in place. I actually did the opposite. It took me too long sometime to take something bigger because I wanted to make sure we really had it down pat. So there were times where I should have moved forward when I didn't. So there's a real delicate line in leadership of knowing when you're ready to take the next step and when you're not ready, and what type of people you need to be bringing on and things like that. So it's a ever learning curve because most entrepreneurs have never ran anything before. So the other thing I think is important. One thing I think I did well, I surrounded myself with an unofficial board of advisors, people who had done this better than me, bigger than me, faster than me, and I just picked their brains all the time, and I still do.
Yeah, that's good advice. I talk to quite a few entrepreneurs, and it's just lonely out there. They don't
Yeah.
have anybody they can talk to. The only folks around them that know what they're talking about are generally the competition, and they can't talk to them. They can't talk to their employees. They can't talk to their spouse about certain things. And yeah, just having somebody who's been there and done that to bounce ideas off, it's priceless for a lot of people. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, so that's what I think is probably one of the most important things is to have people around you who are bigger than you, ahead of you in their businesses, who can who want to see you be successful, and they'll tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Hmm. And in your experience, are those folks willing to help?
Yes.
I think that's a common misconception is that people don't want to help.
You'd be
And
surprised how many people want to help you be successful.
yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, let's get back to millennials. We talked about the millennials a few minutes ago, and I get emails every once in a while from folks who own a business or they're running a business, and they say, "I need help dealing with millennials." Now, there's a lot of negative talk about millennials, and personally, I don't think any generation is necessarily bad or necessarily good. We're all different. So, what advice would you give to folks, managers and leaders, when it comes to working with and managing those millennials?
Well, I'm like most of them. I'm a baby boomer. I had to adjust myself because there was a time where they would say I'm not getting enough praise, and I'm like, huh? You need to tell me how great I'm doing. And because I came along when you got a job, you know, you were happy to have a job, first of all, and you had to go get it. And I found out because I have, two kids myself, 29, 31. And I just noticed things are a little different. So I had to kind of pay attention and grow and find a way to make them feel comfortable, but also help them understand what's expected of them. And it's worked out, but there was a struggle for me. And just like the big thing for me was everything they want to do is by email or text. They don't want to verbally talk to people. Almost like
Mhm.
they're scared to verbally talk to people.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you when you have when you have to have a tough conversation with say somebody who's in their 20s? How do you deliver that message differently than you would for somebody who's 20 years older, somebody in their 40s? Or do you deliver that message differently?
One of the things I learned to go back in time a little bit. And I learned now when I talk to someone in their 20s or early 30s, I'll tell them, I said, look, I'm talking to you as a 59-year-old man, not somebody 29 or 31. I remember being your age. So I hope you'll take what I'm telling you not as something that I'm saying you have to do, but from my experience. So I try and give them real experiences on why I'm saying what I'm saying. Then after that, they have to make the decision. But I did have to come to grips with when I speak now, I have to remember I'm speaking as a 59-year-old man, and that is so different than being 28 years old or 31. Because when I was that age, 31. I was married. I had two little kids. I had been married 4 years, almost 5 years, and I was on my own with my wife. And a lot of the younger generations, you know, they got a lot of school debt, um, and life's just different for them than when we came along. So I had to really look at that too, and understand that the younger generation, they just operate at a little different pace, because things are different for them. So not that it's better or worse. I just had to come to grips with looking at things from their point of view more.
Hmm. I've read that it's important to talk about why you're doing something, why the why behind the what. Have you found the same thing?
Well, for the newer generation, yeah, you got to,
Yeah.
yeah, they need more of why, because they kind of came along. See, when I came along, you didn't ask questions. You know, if your parents or your boss said X, that was the end of it.
Yeah.
This generation, you know, maybe it's probably pretty good for them, because I know my kids, we've had a lot more discussions when they were growing up than I ever did with my parents. Um, they really want to understand, and you
Yeah.
know, I had to come to grips with that, and I'll take time to do my best. But sometimes too, though, there's not enough time to explain why right
Yeah.
at that moment. You know, we need to get this fixed or we need to get it done, and I'll give you the why later.
Yeah.
So sometimes getting them to learn, sometimes you got to react quickly on a situation on a job site that you don't have time to do a day worth of analysis.
Right. Yeah. The ship's about to hit the Titanic's about to hit the
Right,
iceberg. You got to
right.
make a move. We'll talk about it later, but yeah. Yeah, I've had the same experience where the 40 40 year olds, they just jump in, and the other, well, let's talk about this. Maybe the
Right.
younger folks want to talk about other options and understand why we're doing this, and that's some advice for millennials. You need some recognition to know when you're in Titanic mode and there's no time to talk about it. It's just time to execute. You can ask questions later, but not every situation is one where you can go sit down on a couch at Starbucks and talk about it. So
Right. You got to
speaking of,
make that decision and move on.
yeah, yeah. So speaking of ships and icebergs, what is what's a big problem that's facing the construction industry right now? Maybe it's a couple years down the road, but what's an iceberg that the construction industry is headed for that people aren't talking about enough, in your opinion?
Well, this is just my opinion. I think, you know, I think we think technology is going to solve a lot of things that it's not going to solve in
Hmm.
construction. This is still a business to me that technology and robots will never replace. They can't. Technology can't hang steel, can't finish sheetrock, can't pour concrete. I mean, there's some equipment that's been developed, but we have to be careful that we think BIM and everything is, and you know, the iPad and all the things are going to take away from mistakes. Because what I see, I don't think drawings are coordinated as well as they were back when I first started out 35 years ago. Because
Hmm.
we didn't use computers, we used the light table where you actually had to take a full size drawing and you overlay it with a mechanical drawing and architecture, and you really looked. You know, I go into a lot of architectural offices now, and there are no drawing tables. They're doing everything on the computer screen, and they hardly ever print a full size drawing until the
Hmm.
end, until they're ready to print. And it always makes me wonder how many people have really just looked at the full set of drawings. So I think we have to be careful with technology, thinking it's going to solve every problem. Nothing's going to solve this good old fashioned looking with your own eyes and talking as a team and scrubbing drawings together. And secondly, I'm concerned about having enough skilled craftspeople, because we've made people over the years feel that vocational ed is a negative. If you don't want to go to a 4-year college, something's wrong with you. And a lot of people make a great living in construction in the field.
Right.
But we don't promote that enough in our school systems and in society. We make the person who gets dirty working with their hands feel less than. And I think that's a big mistake.
So there's a lot of talk about workforce development going into high schools, I've even talked to some folks who advocate going into elementary schools and talking about the trades as a career. And I agree with you completely. We're facing a problem. It's coming soon. What does a solution look like? I mean, what else can we do, or what should somebody be doing to address this, whether it's on the recruiting side, the training side? I don't know that this is something that technology can fix, but what do you think? I mean, what's something that would help with this problem?
I think one of the biggest things that would help is for us to stop making people feel that something's wrong with them because they like working with their hands. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make.
Do you think that's a cultural thing, like in the States?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, all people talk about is going to college. When I was in high school, I finished high school in 1974. And you had to make a choice if you were going college prep or voc ed. Well, we had a home building course in my high school where this class actually built a house. Well, I wanted to take that class, but I couldn't because I was in college prep. And I think we make kids too early make a decision between college prep and voc ed. And I think we need to allow students to take both in high school and then make a decision. I mean, I just find that unfair to a young person that has to make that decision that early in life.
That's a really good point. My wife is a third grade teacher, and they're already talking about like career prep as a third grader.
Right.
And I've got an eighth grader who's he's making decisions now on what his career is going to be when he picks classes for his freshman year in high school. And I think back, like when I graduated high school, for some reason I knew I was going to go into engineering, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what they did. I don't even know what the basis of my decision was. And I didn't figure it out until I actually worked on a construction project. So yeah, you're right. It's something that it seems like they're pushing the career decision too far upstream in schools and forcing kids to take a fork in the road. And yeah, they can't. Why can't it be both? I guess that's the question. Why not both?
But I've been saying that for years, that that's where we should be.
So what would you, if you had some resources to throw after that issue, what would you do about it?
I would try and get the school systems in the country to realize, let our young folks take all kinds of classes and not have to decide between college prep and voc ed, and give them a chance to grow into where they really are fitted best. And also start having more positive ads and articles about vocational ed. I mean, there is a mixture between, or going to a 2-year technical college or a 1-year program in computers. I mean, we tend to always make young folks feel who don't go to a 4-year college that they're not equal to the person who goes to a 4-year college. And I think we should make every person who wants to get an education of any type feel good. And if you want to work with your hands, make them feel good. So I think we kind of got to just help people feel better about their choices that are good choices if you want to work with your hands.
Yeah. And this is something I hadn't really thought about until we started talking, but think about anytime you see a plumber on a TV show, how are they depicted?
Not well. Kind of like slow, chunky, pants hanging off their butt, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if you're a kid and you watch TV shows like that, then chances are you're not going to be interested in being a plumber.
Right, even though they make really good money.
Yeah, and I don't see a whole lot of plumbers on commercial job sites who look like the guys on TV. So yeah,
Right.
there's some cultural issues that the industry's up against, and it's coming. I mean, the average age of like bricklayers I read in at least one state was late 40s. So
Yeah, it's scary.
now, on one hand, I think it's gonna what'll happen as the level of skilled workers goes down, then the design changes. Like if you look at buildings that were built 200 years ago with the intricate stone masonry and brick masonry, you'd be hard pressed to find a bricklayer even 50 years ago that could do that. So things get simpler as the supply of skilled workers goes down, and you end up with systems like EFIS and metal panels and things that go up faster. But yeah, we're definitely facing an issue in the industry, and I think everybody needs to get involved and get out and spread the message. That's one thing that I hear consistently from business owners and leaders is get into your high schools, get into your middle schools, tell people that the construction trades it's a great way to make a living and a great way to raise your family.
Oh, no doubt.
Yep. So a couple more questions before we wrap up. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, let's say 20 years ago, what would that piece of advice be?
You know, Todd, I've always been scared to do that because
Yeah.
life happens the way it should happen.
Hmm.
Because that one piece of advice would change everything where I am now.
Yeah.
Because I would have made a different turn, a different thing. So if I had to pick one thing, I would probably say don't let fear stop you. Fear,
Mm.
that imaginary fear that exists is just so powerful, and it stops us more than we like to admit.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Great advice. Any book recommendations on business or leadership that you'd like to share?
Well, I do a lot of different, I read a lot of different John Maxwell books. I'm one of those folks, I try and find business books, biographies, where people had to overcome a lot.
Hmm.
And those are the type of books I read. I like to see where people just had to go through some tough times, and they motivate me when they show how they overcame. So I like kind of the underdog business books where people just had to go through a lot to make it.
Are there any particular people, maybe they're not the authors, but the subjects of books that come to mind that you could recommend?
Let me think. See, you would catch me with that one. Let me see. You know, I've read like Hewlett Packard. I've read about Morris Candy. I've read about Johnson Publishing. I mean, there are so many that I've read about. I even look at Steve Jobs. I look at Bill Gates. I mean, I look at so many people's stories, how they started broke or with very little. People didn't give them much credit to make it. And just the phenomenal stories they've done. They always end up motivating me to keep trying.
So adversity, some people would say that having gone through some sort of adversity, either personal, physical, in their business, relationship, that adversity disqualifies them from doing something with the rest of their life. What would you say to that?
Oh, I think that's a crock. I think I think adversity is what makes you better and makes you stronger.
Hmm.
If you haven't been through adversity, then I don't actually think you should be an entrepreneur, because you're going to have some adversity in entrepreneurship that if you don't know how to handle setbacks, failure, and things not going well, you won't make it in business, because, boy, you're going to have your share of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think adversity, well, to me, if I hire somebody in a leadership position, I want to see that they've been through some adversity. I want to see that they've come through it and that they survived it. They didn't just give up. So I
Right.
agree. That's That's great advice. So, last thing, if you could give, well, imagine you're talking to an audience of 400 or 500 small to medium business owners and vice presidents and leaders, and you could give them some advice, some really tactical stuff that they could go do tomorrow or next week in their business, really actionable stuff. What are one or two things that you feel like you would share with them so that it would make their business or their life better?
One, for sure, is really be honest with yourself about the things you need to improve, get better at doing as a leader and as a person. And I think the other thing is most important is to enjoy the journey of life. You know, it's going to have its ups and downs, but nothing stays too long either way. But I meet so many people, they seem miserable or they seem in a rush to hurry up and get through get through life almost.
Yeah.
And I tell this to folks, you know, I remember going to college in 1974 like it was yesterday. No, I'm about to turn 60. And time in life goes so fast. Mm-hmm. And I would tell people to enjoy their family, enjoy the outdoors, enjoy their spiritualness and growing. Take it all in. It's like my children. They're grown now. I have a daughter about to get married. I have a son who's 31. I mean, there's so many things that just time can't, you don't get back. So I would tell people, entrepreneurs, leaders, to enjoy every minute of what you're doing. Because tomorrow's not promised. I have a number of friends right now suffering through cancer. I always use Steve Jobs as a classic example. I mean, he was one of the richest men in the world. He couldn't buy one more day.
Yeah.
So I would tell people to enjoy life, enjoy their family, enjoy what's around them, and don't take it all so serious. Be good at what you do and keep wanting to be good, but don't be so caught up and don't chase money. Don't chase money. Be good at what you do and you'll make money. But more importantly is what you do with the money you have that matters anyway. And last thing I probably would say is do something to help others and expect nothing in return.
It's good advice. Good advice. Well, David, I really appreciate it. Great advice there over the last couple of minutes and then all the way through. It's always a pleasure to hear from somebody who's been in the trenches and started from scratch and been successful for a few decades. Where can people connect with you, either your website, social media, et cetera? How can they get connected with you and find out what you're up to? Okay, well, they can get me on Instagram, cmoody1003. That's C as in Charles, Moody, Moody 1003. Twitter is cmoody1003. Or they can check out my website for Moody Speaks. It's moodyspeaks.com. Or our company website, cdmoodyconstruction.com. Perfect. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes, which I'll share the link to that at the end of the podcast. So, David, again, thanks so much. And folks, if you, I would encourage you to get connected with David on social media, check out his website, check out his blog, and I'm sure you're going to get something out of it. So, David, thanks again. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that wraps this episode up. Be sure to go to constructionleadingedge.com/047 for all the show notes and all the links that were mentioned here. And if you're looking for some help with resolving conflict, having tough conversations at work, how to get out of cash flow crunch mode, 15 red flags that a successful contractor may self-destruct, as well as a list of books that will flat out change your life, then you need to go to my resources page. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/resources, or just go to the home page, click on the resources tab, and there's a bunch of stuff there that I guarantee will help you out. So until next time, my name is Todd DeWalt. Thanks for listening.